Thanks, Valia, and thanks for tapping me on the shoulder to give this best presentation. I will do my best to give you some kind of glimpse of a number of ways to slice and dice it. So my intention is to really just, you can see in this overview, I'd like to initially talk to you about how the whole thing got started, about what community informatics is, a little bit about the design and the actual doing of the research, some of the findings, which are rich and complex, and the contribution I feel that the work has made to the field of community informatics. What I've learned, I'm thinking here of the students, and perhaps lessons that could be useful, and where to from here with the magnum opus. So I think, for me it's very important now that the work that I've done is carried on, or at least I can now use it as the platform for new ventures. So I'll let you know what I have in mind at the end. So I'm going to have to just spend a couple of minutes on each of those things because I think I have 20 odd minutes. So just to give you some idea, before I tell you about community informatics and how the project got started, I wanted to indicate some of the themes that informed or shaped or sat at the back of my mind in doing this research about internet access in community settings. And that statement at the top of the screen there is actually just part of the call for papers that I responded to for the ANZCA conference that I mentioned to you before. There was a stream in there called Information and Knowledge Sharing. And that statement jumped out at me because it was very much the experience that I'd had working among people grappling with the internet and making sense of the internet. That knowledge sharing is a world of conversation, interpretation, community and connection, and that's kind of a flavour of what it was that I was exploring. That technology in a community setting is about the social context and the relationships. So that was a theme in the background. Yesterday, however, I read something quite interesting in the work of someone called Charles Ledbetter, who talks about now, years later after the research that I did, he's talking about technology facilitating the power of the lateral connection. And I guess that's what I'm thinking as I move out of the PhD work and into other things, that what I've learned in community settings is that the lateral connection among people in relationship with one another, that's a tremendous potential that technology is starting to liberate, especially with the widespread popularity of social media now. I was also reading in Charles Ledbetter's thinking that he's got this phrase, and I'll explain a little bit more shortly, or he thinks in terms of social interventions and solutions in society as being pretty much offered in one of four ways. Things are done for people, or they're done with people, they're done by people themselves, or they're done to. And in the area, I guess, of community development and communication for social change and the work that I've been doing, it's very evident that depending on which of those approaches you take, there are very different outcomes. And I quite like that short summary: for, with, by, or to. Which one, and what are the implications of that? And also in reflecting on the work that I've done, I have really been positioning the research itself and the conclusions drawn from it within an area that could be described as social epistemology, or the social dimensions of knowledge or information sharing. And really what social epistemology suggests, or what it looks at, is how social relations shape knowledge practices and how practices of knowledge production affect the social context. So all of those ideas, it's about connection, relationships, context, social setting. That's the the approach that I took in doing the study of internet access in 2 communities. So those themes will come through in the few minutes I have left. So how this all started to happen, and I'm sure it's no news to anyone in the room that conducting a piece of research for a PhD is a very challenging and long-term kind of task, and it's not necessarily begun when you fill out the enrolment form. It's something that you think about and you shape. You start to get intrigued with things, and at some point you find yourself ready to commit to exploring it. And I guess I'm lucky in that my project was long. It was challenging because I was working full-time throughout, and that's not ideal. But on the other hand, I think it is quite good to take a slow and measured approach over a number of years. And because my work was very much to do with the evolution of the internet, or as it played out in social settings, all of that has changed so dramatically in the years since the late 90s, and that was when I was starting to think about it. So one of the challenges of doing the work has been keeping up with what's happening. And there's just been an immense amount of reading, of theory. As Peter says to the students often, you know, we're lucky in our discipline or our field of study because we get to poke our noses into so many other people's business. Social theory, social psychology, sociology, as well as communication, internet studies, theories of community, it all plays in. But anyway, I'm mentioning that because it's been a very rich and wonderful part of what I've done, that I've been sort of swallowed up in a decade of change. And it was initiated, or it sort of kicked into life with the reports released in the US by the National Telecommunications and Information NTIA, I can't remember what the A is for, but some reports titled Falling Through the Net, which started to come out in the mid-90s, 1995. And at that point, with the identification of a digital divide, people started to sort of sit up and take notice that, you know, there were dramatic inequalities emerging on a global, national, community level. But it brought with it this sort of knee-jerk response, which was evident in the literature at the time, from the mid to the late 90s, that access, you provide internet access, and that's going to bring about certain changes. And it wasn't long after that, the late 90s and early 2000s, that some researchers and commentators began to see that as a very limited and limiting position. And then other questions began to emerge, such as, does the internet erode community? There was kind of a deep concern that people's preoccupation with the internet was not in fact very constructive thing at all. But in fact, we still, you know, we see this now, don't we, with regular reports in the media about concerns over teenagers and how much time they spend in, you know, in solitude on Facebook and so forth. That question has never really died. And yet, there has been, on the other hand, enormous interest and a lot of research being done on the other side of the question, which is that the internet has huge potential for building stronger community. And research has moved very much in this direction. And that's the bit of the wave. Unfortunately, I kind of climbed aboard at about 2002 and started to look and think and read and frame up the study. But what I've ended up finding in my work is very much in sync with this this move, and it's still in its infancy. Researchers are still looking at, you know, what do we need to do? What are the conditions that facilitate stronger community with internet use? And there's a lot yet to be done in this area. So community informatics is a term that describes that field of, or that section of the field of study. And it's about how the internet or ICTs, information and communication technologies, can be harnessed to empower community. And the point is made many times in the literature that in order to get meaningful findings here, it really has to be longitudinal, over a number of years, maybe 5, maybe longer, before we actually know what are the longer term implications of promoting or providing internet access, what happens when providers withdraw from a community, for example. So the field is still in its infancy, and I have to say, even though the PhD study has taken a long time, it's just been so interesting, and it's just ever-changing and evolving. So, as I've mentioned just before, my take is to look at the internet as socially constructed and shaped by people in social contexts for their own purposes. So rather than, sorry that's a little bit small to see, but a technologically determinist assumption that provision of internet access and encouragement of its use is going to lead to predetermined or expected outcomes. Rather, look at the social setting and observe, I guess, the outcomes or work with technology in that setting, and then the social outcomes are created by that particular social context. And what I've found, as I'll try to illustrate very quickly, is that, or my approach has been to look at a component called social cohesion within a social setting, and what relationship may exist between internet use and social cohesion. What I think I've found in the results of my study is that where you have evident, strong social cohesion to start with, the implementation of a community internet scheme can, under certain conditions, facilitate more social cohesion. So, just a quote encapsulating to this point my take on it and my approach to the study that I did. And actually quite a useful quote, because it brings us to the present too, with our own, as practitioners, teachers, researchers, our own grappling and organisational context with the latest developments in internet use. We're having our training, we're having our, the pressure on us to use technology in particular ways, and it has to be understood within that larger context. But the first part of that there, the symbolic meaning of technology, jointly produced through the individual's interaction with the technology and the larger social structure, that's what I was interested in. So what I wanted to do was to make a contribution by gathering empirical evidence pertaining to the relationship between internet access and social well-being, and specifically, as I've said, using the construct of social cohesion, and specifically looking at a type of internet access which is free home internet provided through an organisation in New Zealand called Computers in Homes. And of course, I ran very quickly into the problem of deciding what do I mean by community. And without having much time to spend on it, community is a very slippery term. And to make it very clear at this point, of course, community could be regarded as the virtual community, and I very quickly decided that's a whole other can of worms. It's not what I'm talking about and not what my research aimed to deal with. For me, in my study, community was the networks of relationships within a geographically defined area. So it was a geographical setting, and it was a set of people who define themselves as a community in that setting, and therefore it's a symbolic construct for them that is an outcome of what they do together. And I needed to have that very specific understanding of that key construct in order to investigate it.